6 million Ukrainian households are still without power today following a barrage of Russian missile strikes on the country's critical infrastructure.
New satellite images from NASA show the extent of the damage. They really are breathtaking, with Ukraine almost completely in the dark compared to the light you can see from its neighboring countries.
But this morning, we're learning there is some good news in the capital of Kyiv, where water, heating, and cell service is now being restored.
Our Claire Sebastian is following the latest from London. Claire, some progress, but there are still millions of people without power and water as the weather begins to turn bitterly cold. What are you hearing on the ground there?
Yeah, Sarah, we're hearing from the country's electricity transmission operator this morning that about 3/4 of electricity demand is now being met. That is helped by the fact that those 4 nuclear plants, 3 of them in Ukrainian-controlled territory still, are now back online. They were, for the first time in decades, knocked offline at the same time during that barrage of attacks that we saw on Wednesday. There are still restrictions in place. There are still millions of people without power, but things are improving. It was down to about 130,000 in the capital, Kyiv, who don't have power at the moment. But the hardship, we really got a clear look at what this sort of strategy by Russia, these attacks on civilian infrastructure, is doing to people. Take a look at this picture. A young girl was photographed who had to go to a gas station because she uses a sort of inhaler breathing equipment, and she needed electricity to make it work. This is the kind of thing that we were seeing. We also saw doctors having to perform operations in the dark using headlamps. There's one hospital in Kyiv, one of Ukraine's biggest state hospitals, that told us that they almost had to evacuate patients when they lost water. That impedes things like sterilizations, all kinds of things in a hospital that require water. So that's really the kind of thing that we're seeing. They are racing to rebuild. They are making progress. But meanwhile, the threat still remains, of course, that Russia will continue with this tactic of attacking civilian infrastructure. The Kremlin said this week that if Ukraine wants the, quote, suffering to go away, they have to meet Moscow's demands. There is no sign that Ukraine is prepared to do that.
Claire Sebastian in London, thank you so much. CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton is joining us now this morning. Good morning, Colonel.
Good morning, Sarah.
Let's start with those blackouts. Having been in Ukraine when it's really, really cold, there is nothing like the cold there. Let's listen to NATO Secretary General on Putin's shifting strategy 9 months now into this invasion.
What we see now is that President Putin is trying to weaponize winter. And by indiscriminate, deliberate attacks on cities, on civilian infrastructure, he tries to deprive the Ukrainians of gas, heating, water.
Weaponizing winter is a great way to put it. How do you fight an enemy that's now specifically targeting civilian infrastructure, making civilians suffer?
Yeah, that's one of the most difficult things, Sarah, that you really look at how you defend the major centers, the major population centers. The key issue that the Ukrainians have is that there are so many things they have to defend, and the Russians have a lot of targets to choose from. The fact that they have all these targets to choose from makes it so hard to defend against. And what they're doing is, instead of hitting major power centers, which they're doing, they're also going ahead and they're going after transmission lines, transformers, things like that. And so every single localized attack that they make affects local areas. And when you add that up, then you get the blackout scenes that you see from Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine. So it's a very difficult thing for the Ukrainians to defend against. They've done a remarkable job given what they have, but frankly, more needs to be done and more help needs to be provided them.
The UN's nuclear watchdog has started providing support to 4 more nuclear power plants in Ukraine after they were disconnected from the grid. There's a huge fear. I remember feeling that fear very vividly when we heard about the takeover of the Zaporizhzhia plant that has been badly damaged. Is there any fear that he will go that far and try to create a nuclear disaster?
There certainly is a fear that Putin could weaponize these nuclear power plants. And the way he would do that is potentially use them as a dirty bomb, in essence, a huge dirty bomb. He's done that with the Zaporizhia plant by occupying it. The other plants would be a bit more difficult for him to control because Putin his forces do not occupy them. They're in Ukrainian hands. But if they are struck in a certain way, if their cooling mechanisms, for example, are destroyed or impacted in any way, and the backup diesel generators are hurt, then that could very well spell a major problem for the Ukrainians. And another thing to keep in mind, the nuclear power plants are very important in Ukraine because the country gets about 55% of its energy from those plants, and that makes them a major target for the Russians and their campaign.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about air defense now and the risk of escalation. Germany offered Poland Patriot air defense units after a stray missile hit Poland and killed a couple of its citizens there. Poland has declined, saying they should be sent to Ukraine instead. Now, we now know the U.S. has said that they believe that missile came out of Ukraine trying to defend itself against Russia. But NATO's Secretary General says all Eastern NATO allies should be girding their defenses. Let's listen to this.
We need both increased air defense of our NATO allies in the east, in the Baltic countries, Poland, Romania, but also we need more air defense in Ukraine. That's obvious. We see the horrendous, horrific attacks every day against civilian infrastructure, against cities in Ukraine, and therefore we need to help Ukraine being able to shoot down those incoming Russian missiles and drones.
So if NATO allies start beefing up their military readiness, if you will, their hardware, like air defenses, is this something that might escalate a conflict, or will it give Russia pause?
Well, the Russians would look at it as being an escalation. However, it would be a necessary step because an integrated air defense system, and specifically an integrated air and missile defense system, as mentioned not only by Secretary General Stoltenberg, but also the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, those weapon systems are really defensive in nature. And what they do is they do the best job that's currently technologically available to protect not only the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, but civilian institutions as well. And so that's the kind of thing that you want. You want the Patriot missile defense systems. You want a system known as IRIS-T that the Germans have delivered one of. They've got 3 more on the way to Ukraine. Those are the kinds of things that can help protect the cities and help prevent the kinds of blackouts that we're seeing in Kyiv and throughout the country.
Yeah, that country is suffering so greatly this winter, especially. Colonel Cedric Leighton, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
You bet. At any time, Sarah.